And we did, he cleverly used this platform called Strelka Institute. It's an architecture school. It's also a place where you have a lot of debates and people can just come, ask questions, and you have international experts, local experts. And we did a series of meetings and discussions. It helped. It was really a really positive thing for the project. But most importantly, the process was transparent, and I think that's something we're moving towards increasingly. Every part of the world, we're moving towards this, less from this one-man vision, more towards this participatory, transparent process.
Yeah, and certainly that's something in Moscow that I feel that in the last few years, for the first time, that we're starting to see some progress in terms of consultations and taking trying to open things up to discussion. And I would like to come back to that maybe in a little bit, but seeing as we started to touch on Georgia, I noticed...
I'm the Vice Prime Minister of Georgia, so I'll be a bit biased obviously talking about Georgia. But then there are several issues, as for any citizen of this country, that are quite easily identified when we speak about the urban construction review or general transformation of the social space as such in any cities. And it's a very short comment to begin with. I'm afraid that for those who live now in Russia and then all the experiences of not only post-Soviet Russia but in Soviet experiences as well, it's very difficult to understand how different this country is. And it's not a one-man run show country, and no decisions on local or central level are taken by any single person individually. It comes like that if one person says about that more in the position that he is, than there are many other actors who are part of decision-making, that view or implementation, and that people are part of that too. And when we speak about PDC as a city, we've been faced with very practical problems. It comes very close to the psychology of the Soviet urbanization, something that is still quite a bit of a factor in many post-Soviet countries, and Russia is a good example of that, yes. One is that in Soviet, that's my remembrance from my childhood. I don't have much of an experience of the Soviet times, but then I know that the problems are coming from as a legacy from the Soviet times. We never had any public spaces that much. So it was urbanization. We had no concept that there should have been places for people to express themselves, to have open social interaction, and it was a very artificial urbanization, not really taking into account local traditions and local culture and social way of behavior as well. So it was a complete distortion in that sense, or transformation of our urbanization without any regard to the roots of the cities. The main ideology behind that was that the whole Soviet Union should have been in that sense as well, sort of one space in terms of urbanization as well. So no matter in which republic one should have been living, they should have had a comfortable feeling that they are something is the same, so that it's common all over the Soviet Union. So there was no regard whatsoever at any time to the local traditions, cultures, and very good heritage of urbanization as well. Some of the countries in the Soviet space retained social spaces, like the Balts, for example, because the occupation of the Soviet Union was late in their cases, unlike the Georgia, where occupation happened in 1921 already by Soviets. And then in that sense, they already have managed to retain some of it, which already had by that time. More public spaces, more parks, and more sort of a real urban sense of social European space, in that sense one could have. And then in addition to that, what we've had as a legacy from the 90s was a complete archaic development of the city. Those were the times when if anybody had any amount of money, they could write anywhere basically at that time and do whatever they wanted, whatever they wanted. So most of the parks, most of the public spaces that were still part of the city were pretty much cut off at that time. And they're all private properties. You can't really deal with that in a very rigid way, obviously. So now the city is in a position to come up with a concept, how to urbanization. It's not even an urbanization, it's a transformation of the city should happen in such a way that you respect the private properties which have emerged in the 90s. You open up the space for public interaction, which is the biggest target right now. You renovate the old heritage, historic heritage, in such a way that the old part of the city, the heart of the city, becomes not only habitable, but then has its own function as a touristic destination, and in terms of the hotels and places for eating out or just walking out in that sense, and how you retain this beauty of the city without damaging it, but then making it sort of habitable for the modern times as well. how we make sure that people who live in these very shabby conditions in the center of the city have the new living conditions so that's satisfactory to them. And the discussion on all of those things are very open. On local council levels, in terms of directly elected participants to the council. Our mayor is a directly elected mayor, for God's sake, and it's not something where the central power decides on what does in the city, because he is directly accountable to his own constituencies in that sense. So this is a very heavy debate in this country, because we have limited resources, we have too many problems when it comes to the urban development of the country, and we have very little time, because there are more than 1 million people living in this country, and then the country is 4.5 million at most in that sense. So you have an everyday related problems that are associated with these people you have to deal with. And that's part of the problem in this space, which is again a leftover problem of the Soviet Union times. That country had an ambition of being a superpower in the world stage, and people had no normal infrastructure in terms of everyday lives. So sewage systems, water supply systems, roads. Everything was done disastrously, and we have obviously the same problem. People have more money, more cars, and more infrastructure that is needed for that, and it had to be done now in a very short period of time. So discussion is open, it is not perfect, it needs to be improved, there needs to be more urban planning for better transformation, but believe me, it's not analogous to what happens in Russia in that sense.
Just another thing, what you describe is an interesting movement, but from almost a super planning approach of the Soviet time, where almost imposing a model, perhaps, to in the 90s that you were describing something completely the far west of capitalistic approach where any individual could do whatever they want if they had any money. And this is something that actually still happened in those cities. And that's how now the approach is to strike a balance between a planning structure which controls a little bit this short-term capitalistic kind of approach to development that happens anywhere in the world, and not to impose too much a model. So it's really a balance that now contemporary urban planning approaches try to set up. I don't have any particular comments on Georgia because I don't know, but just as a general comment on the way urban planning is moving from a super planning to actually nothing, and now to something which is more, we're talking more about frameworks than plans now.
Okay. Well, I said in the beginning that I'm not a great expert in contemporary Georgian architecture, but I read something, and I have seen for this last 3 days, I'm walking around Tbilisi, and I talked to some architects, and that's my personal experience. And what I've seen, I've seen some terrible urban design mistakes, which is very visible, like a huge housing estate built on the Rustaveli Street. It's more across the museum, National Museum. It's a terrible thing. I don't know how it happened, but it happened. Somebody took this decision. It's my personal view. I'm not sure that this new building, which is to be built under construction on the river with some roof. I don't know who's an architect. Maybe it's a beautiful building, but it's very strange that it's not cultural